Do you feel continually let down by modern media? Do you miss the good old days, back when all that mattered was a good story and not some agenda? Do you have ambitions of picking up a pen and pad and fighting the creative war yourself? Then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'm going to talk to a creator who said enough is enough and started making the content they wished was out there. Join us as we discuss the ups and downs of the self-publishing world. We want to help empower you to join the Iron Age of media. Welcome to Iron Age Marketing. Welcome, everyone, to the Iron Age Marketing Podcast. I'm here today with Mr. JV Hilliard. How are you doing today, boss?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Much appreciated.
JV is going to be different than most of the guests we've had in that JV is a traditionally published author himself. However, he has managed in his time that he's been doing what he's been doing to get his fingers into a whole lot of little pies. Just before we started this conversation, we were talking about licensing his property to a video game. You have your own, it was Altered States magazine that you run. So he's kind of fleshed out a little bit of everywhere. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you managed to become what you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So, for those of you who haven't read my stuff, I am an epic fantasy and dark fantasy author. So if you like a mixture of Lord of the Rings meets Game of Thrones, I think that's the best way to kind of describe at least the genre I'm trying to build with the realm of Warminster. It's a 4-book saga. First 2 books have been released. The next 2 books will be released in April and hopefully in August or September of 2023. And, that'll finish up the first series. But as part of that, as you mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to be working with a video game company that's licensing my intellectual property to create an augmented reality video game, which we could talk about at length. And also, I am the owner of Altered Reality Magazine, which is an e-magazine that helps independent authors find their first portal to publication. We usually work with a lot of indies, and it's speculative fiction and speculative poetry. So if you're a fan of sci-fi or fantasy or horror or dystopian or gothic or cryptids and things like that, if you read our stuff, you'll find a nice home back at Altered Reality there, and you could find it at alteredrealitymag.com.
Right on. So that excites me. My other podcast is called the Road to Hell Film Reviews Podcast. Me and my partner, he's a utopian history expert. And so we analyze science fiction movies for trying to suss out was this a warning or telling us what they're going to do to us? I don't know.
Or maybe a bit of both, right? Yeah.
Well, especially when you start looking at like who some of the people that have been in our like science fiction canon were connected to. Man, those eugenics organizations from the 1940s, they had a lot of fingers and a lot of pies, apparently.
Yeah, without a doubt, and you can even see it today. I mean, I think the one I would point at most recently is Ready Player One. And what Ernest Cline has done there in talking about a world in 2040, which isn't that far off, that is polluted and overpopulated, and people escape the dingy, dirty, polluted, ugly world by going into the oasis and living their world in their virtual characters, which they have the ability to kind of create their own lives and earn stuff in the same way we play video games. And, even though we've seen very various levels of dystopian stuff through Hunger Games and Divergent, and, the list can go on and on. Even when, we were younger, like 1984 with George Orwell.
Michael Gibson.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is, I think people always write that because it's in the back of everybody's mind is what's the next great hurdle. And folks like Orson Welles, they, had their path to do that all the way up to Cline and what he's done with the Ready Player series that he's doing. So,
well, Ready Player to me, like especially modern audiences, I don't think understand the whole cyberpunk movement. I think kind of like unless you were really tied in, got looked over a lot, with the exception of like some of the 90s movies. But 90s movies weren't ready to like really project what was in those guys' heads. It wasn't until you got to like The Matrix that they started actually being able to realize some of the vision for the future that those guys had. But in that doing is like a lot of times the Wachowski brothers get the credit for The Matrix when really that concept predates them by about 20 years.
Well, right. Yeah. And I would even go a step further and say that movement's been around for like you said, a while. I mean,
Huxley and all them.
yeah. And however you want to spin it, I think that the technology was first available from the Matrix and the films in particular to use it. But, you see a lot of that now, even in anime and some of the stuff that Netflix has been really, focusing on is, I watch a lot of that stuff and they've got, any kind of version of, insert name punk, there it is, whether it's steampunk, cyberpunk, etc. Punk,
Yeah.
it's there and it's popular for a reason. I think people like to think about it, but I also think people are kind of afraid of it because there is a violent dystopian kind of world that everyone's afraid may turn that way. And whether you're looking at today's world and seeing hints of the direction that we're going or not, I mean, I think that that's really it's interesting because people will like to read that not just for their escapism, but also their kind of the Nostradamus kind of a flavor to it, right?
Well, it certainly feels more prescient now than it has maybe 30 years before. Like, we're closer than I think we'd ever expected we get to the world of the future that we were being told existed just out. Oh, it's,
Warned about, yeah.
yeah. It's like, hence the question: Are we tried to solve the problem, or are we just we get like a coming attraction sort of thing out of these guys?
Well said, well said.
So obviously you're a very well read guy. You know this stuff in the canon. There is there. I'm assuming you said, given your age, you probably went into publishing with a publishing house mostly because that was the way to do it at the time. Even when I graduated college, you wanted to be published. You had to go find someone that was going to take a chance on you, deal with all that whole mess of getting representation, doing that. Does that sound accurate for you? How long have you actually been doing the author route?
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit different than I would guess that you would suspect. Like, I only started writing 2 years ago.
Okay.
It's always been on my bucket list of things to do. I was writing when I was in middle school and in high school, and I wanted to write. And it was always on, like I said, always on the list of things to check off before my career was over.
You don't mind me asking, what was that life in between?
Yeah, well, the life in between is still going on. I mean, my day job is I'm a DC lobbyist. I do work with the defense and technology industries. Yeah. So, like, my day is filled with realism, right? Every day I am immersed in politics. I am immersed in government. I am immersed in world affairs, and so for me, I write and have been writing for the last 20 years of my career. It's just been nonfiction, right?
Yeah.
But the other side of my brain has always been screaming for me to do creative writing. And I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons guy. I've been playing D&D since
Yeah.
I was literally 10 years old. And my writing path veered away because of my profession. In part, the kind of job that I do, it's really difficult to do anything except for that. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
all encompassing, it doesn't have hours. You're not punching a clock when you do what I do. You have ebbs and flows in your calendar that allow you to, maybe have some downtime during certain periods of the year when they're out of session or, there's less travel going on. But you find that, once you're in it, it's hard to get out of it. And then when COVID hit, 2 years ago, I really had a chance there was nothing going on. DC was shut down, and my wife sort of like wagged her finger at me and was like, "Oh, you're not going to sit around doing nothing, are you?" And I said, no, no. So I started to go through my bucket list and started checking off stuff. And, writing was on there. And so when I wrote it, I expected 100% that I was going to be an indie author. That was the way I wanted to go. And the reason is because I've owned about 6 different businesses in my lifetime. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Some of them I've sold and made money on. Others have not been as successful. But at the end of the day, I've always owned a handful of businesses. And I started to treat this as my own business. And I was trying to learn from others. So I started to take a class at a local community college. I reached out to a group of, creative writers that were, critiquing each other's work. And I was able to put together what I thought was going to be a standalone novel that I would self-publish and say, off my chest, I did it. I could say I did it and it'd be done. And then I got more traction than that. What happened was I shared it with a, professor friend of mine, and she had a chance to read it and told me, this is really publishable, and asked me what I wanted to do with it. And I didn't know much about the industry at the time. So what I did was I ended up getting a development editor and a copy editor, and they started hammering away. And by the time we had finalized the product and I had sent it out to my D&D guys, sort of like my beta readers, to let them, hammer away at it too, we had a pretty finished, polished product. And so at that point, my copy editor said, you know what? I used to work with this woman that together when we were at a publishing house. She has a small publishing house that focuses on exclusively fantasy and sci-fi, a little dystopian. And the name of the publishing house is Dragon Moon Press. And if you can't tell by the name, that's really what she focuses on. And so I got referred into her. She read it and she made me a deal. She's like, look, I will publish this, but it's got to be, I want a series because fantasy readers love series. And so if you're willing to go 3 books, I'm willing to do this. And so I committed to 3, and that soon became 4. And it's been well received. I mean, I think that, my readership is higher than I thought it was going to be, especially for books 1 and 2. And, my hope, to your original point, is that I would like to leave my day job and do this professionally. And I think if the success of the books continue to trend that way and the video game comes out in 2024,
Mm-hmm.
then I might be able to, to kind of walk away from my professional career and really play the back nine of my career,
Mm-hmm.
just doing the authorship stuff. So, that's really where it came from and how I landed there. And that's an awkward thing because most people query for years, or they try to find an agent that'll put them in the right place. And I frankly, I got a lottery ticket. I was at the right place at the right time.
I have a buddy who's been trying for I think 20 years since he got out of college to get published, and no luck.
Yeah. Well, I may be able to help him. I have, does he write my stuff?
That's the problem. He writes, how would I put it? Essentially like Max Payne is the way I always think about him.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
writes like a hyper violent, very aggressive, macho characters. Yeah,
that's cool though.
it is cool. That's also I think probably one of the harder genres to break into when you start getting into like the spy stuff. Where you're borderline that John Grisham, I guess is how I think of it.
Yeah.
Also, it's not really the kind of stuff I particularly like reading. So
Yeah.
there's that. I can remember the day I got my first Dungeons and Dragons book handed to me. So that's right up my alley.
Yeah, that's what took it off for me. Like I started playing. Like I had a chance to start playing at a young age, and we still play on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've got a group of guys I've been playing now with for 20 years plus, and we've been playing since high school together, and we just do Skype on Sunday nights.
Mm-hmm.
Usually 3 out of 4 Sundays in the month, and we've been playing, and now we're on 5th edition D&D, and we've played other variations of games. We've played Star Wars and Star Trek and Robotech and BattleTech and a handful of others.
Star Wars is usually the big one. I personally, like, my game of choice has always been White Wolf. The World of Darkness stuff. I loved that.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. Like we've dabbled in that, but we've always kind of migrated back to Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. Maybe that's the pinnacle of them all or whatever.
Well, it's certainly the easiest to find people to play,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an easy concept. Hey, we're in medieval times throwing around swords.
Yeah,
I think a part of White Wolf's issues and spread is that they actually had so much you could do with it that like everyone would gravitate towards one type of game or another. It's like, well, this dude wants to play mage and he wants to play werewolf, and great, we're all kind of in the same world.
yeah.
And meanwhile, I personally, I only liked playing mortals in it because I just thought it was more fun to play things that could get killed real easily.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a risk to that, right? You feel the pressure of success on you as opposed to others where, you regenerate or whatever. You're banned for a while.
Even in the D&D setting, like, they always had Ravenloft there that you could play in, and it wasn't fundamentally different than playing just, in Forgotten Realms or anything like that.
Well, Ravenloft, I have to admit, like Ravenloft is my favorite
Mm-hmm.
Dungeons and Dragons modules, and I'm talking about the originals. Now they redid it with the Curse of Strahd, like they did with the most recent Tomb of Horrors, and in many respects improved it and added stuff to do so that the modules weren't finite. But I also like the fact that they were able to translate that into a video game, and I think those that are tabletoppers also play video games, and those that are video gamers also play tabletop sometimes. And it's a way to kind of weave these things together and introduce a very important brand to Dungeons and Dragons, the folks that may not have seen it. And that was a lot of fun. Like I used to play a lot of Diablo back in the day, and that it was a way, in the same way when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, they tried to introduce everybody to Magic the Gathering, and they even changed the spell systems so there were more spell points oriented and stuff like that. And I think those kind of things, that transition continues to help grow the pie, and I think that there's room for all sorts of games in there. I just mine of choice because of, like you said, ease of play is D&D.
Another question is, so I'm curious if you look at like adding the video game element to what you do as almost being like legs to ensure that it has viability in the future, because books do become less and less vogue as time goes on, but if you can utilize them as a springboard into like the current storytelling medium, I mean, the bottom line is video games are the preferred storytelling medium right now. I mean, look at right now with, what's her name there, Harry Potter.
Yeah.
People are dying for more Harry Potter, and this game was one of the best-selling games of all time.
Yeah, and it's just a different medium to express the same art form, right? So, I think they lend well with one another. You've got, and there are many others too. Like video games are very visual. My book's just based on the amount of rich world building I need to do to build that image in your head and in your mind's eye as you're reading it. That translates not only well to video games, but I also think graphic novels. Like I can see my books being adapted into a really cool graphic novel series because when you write epic fantasy, I've got histories and maps and genealogies and I've got my own glossary of terms. I've made up words to
My wife's a token person, so I'm used to looking at books that are half all of the extra crap that's in them.
Yeah, so like for me, like I'm immersed in it, and video games and graphic novels allow you to play a lot of that out. And like you said, it's a different way to reach into another group. So from a business perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, yes, that absolutely does. But this could easily be turned into a tabletop role-playing game. I can see this being either a silver or a small screen kind of thing, but budgets with all the CGI that would have to happen might be a little tight. And that kind of stuff doesn't happen the way it used to. And people in Hollywood just don't pick up a script anymore and read it. They want to see that you got 500,000 followers and you're selling stuff and YouTube channel and blah, blah, blah. So, we, as a collective, we've tried to build that presence as we continue to grow. And the first domino to fall was that video game. And if I'm selling a video game, likely that'll beget me selling additional books. If I'm selling additional books, that will likely beget me selling additional video game opportunities. So, I think they grow with one another. And like you said, it's a different form of the art that will, that may, even outgrow the original, which is the novel.
See, and I respect it despite not being a gamer myself. I lost touch with video games when I went to college. And that was like the last video game controller I was used to playing with was the PlayStation 1 controller. And so when I first picked up an Xbox controller like 10 years ago, I'm like, guys, I think I don't have time for this. It's too much work. I think I'll just go back to my pen and paper and read my books.
Pull the plug. Yeah.
You guys can keep going on doing your thing. Like my wife, she's like, the last controller I used was the Dance Dance Revolution, Matt. That's how I like to play games.
Well,
Well, I'm curious, since you are a serial entrepreneur yourself, have you ever looked into like selling courses or anything like that on world building, having gone through this whole thing, tried to monetize the actual experience of helping others to create more of the content that we love?
Yeah, not yet. I've done it. I'm doing my first rung at a community college here in Pittsburgh where I'm teaching 2 classes. They'll be more like seminars. The first one will be a 3-hour deal, which is focused on how to be a sci-fi fantasy writer. The second one is how to get yourself published. And, those 2 courses, depending on how they come out, I'd like to potentially adapt that and make that a tool and be able to either sell that or in some instances give it away as part of it. I also feel like I've had middling success. I want to be more successful before I'm telling other people how to do what I've been able to do. And even though others may look at me and say, well, you've had a lot of success based on what you've said, for me, I want to make sure that I get to a certain plateau that I'm comfortable with before I'm out there selling it to. Not to say that I couldn't, it's in my nature to do those kind of things. But I also think for me, I'd like to be able to tell a greater story than where I am currently. Only be doing it.
Maybe have a little more repeatability with your process, perhaps. You're like,
yeah.
Hey, I've done this a bunch of times, not just the one, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I just got lucky and, follow me. This is something more, I think that from a resume perspective, it may be better for me to kind of wait it out and see, because I've only really been doing it for a little over 2 years now. And even though I've had some success, it's not the success I think I need to be at before I stick that toe in the water.
You're not Stephen King yet.
No,
that's what it amounts to.
No, I'm not. And I will never be.
You're not selling absolute garbage for way too much money.
Oh, poor Stephen. Poor Stephen.
I don't get me wrong. I love Stephen King. I've read way too much of him. And I think at his best, like, man, he's one of the greats. But then he did do From a Buick 8, and, well, that's kind of its own thing.
Yeah, and
I always love that Family Guy joke about, and a lamp monster terrorizes the New England town. Are you even trying anymore, Stephen? Ooh, when can we have it? And I think you can only appreciate that if you've like read enough of Stephen King's work to go, it's not all great. Some of it's just like I needed to put out a book to keep the contract with Simon and Schuster going.
Yeah, keep it rolling. Yeah, that happens sometimes. I mean, look, we're all part of that too, and some ideas are better than others. Sometimes you hit a home run, other times it's a strikeout, but at least he's getting up to the plate, right?
Well, and that's the thing that like for the longest time I think it seemed like there was no chance for a lot of people to do that. And one of the beauties of the past couple of years is that there's I will say enough people running like the big media companies that have completely lost touch with like their audiences, and they're just trying anything thinking, oh, this will work, whatever, and a lot of times it doesn't. And that's created an opening where people are looking for alternatives and
Hmm.
actively seeking them out, which opens up. I bring it up all the time. You've got the Thousand True Fans model by Pat Flynn. Like, if you can get 1,000 people to give you $5 a month, like you'll do really well in life.
Yeah.
There's a lot like it doesn't take much, So if you take that shot, I mean, it doesn't take much to really pay returns on it.
Yeah.
And maybe all the success they'll have is the kind of success you've had. That's still better than going and working in the factory every day, and that's the only outlet you have in life for a lot of people.
Yeah. No, it's something that you gotta, take your swings at the plate when you get them. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and if you can find a way to be repetitive in that respect and be successful at it and find a readership, what I've found is I was told and I didn't know what to believe. I've never been there, but it's like, hey, book one, you're not going to make any money. Book two, you'll make a little bit more money, but still no money. Book three, you're hoping you break even on it. Book four is when now you've got a readership that's big enough to sustain you. You just have to,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and you've got to get there. And in this era of rapid release where everybody wants to binge something, it's hard to do that when you're writing epic fantasy. My average size of book is around 500 pages,
Mm-hmm.
140,000 words. Like you can't write a book a month. It's just impossible to keep
Yeah.
up that pace. So
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing is even trying to get out a series within a 2 year period is Herculean, I believe. But the first book I did, almost took me like a year. The second book was 6 months. Now I got it done in 3 months, and hopefully I can continue to get better and better at it. But it's a process, and you just have to learn how to play the game. And other people play the game differently. There are folks out there that'll knock out 20 books because they're writing novellas that are all 80 pages long. I can't. I don't do it. I can't write books that small. Yeah.
I have a guest coming on. I actually have an interview with him on Sunday. That he claims, I think, to have written 80 books since like the beginning of the pandemic. I'm assuming they're not all great. The reason I want to have him on, however, is he sent me the greatest email, like from a marketing perspective that you could imagine, where everything that you want included was included, and he even did like a psychological trick where he's like, and I've already shared you and your page out on my Facebook. So now he's already done me a favor in my head. Psychologically, I have to do
Yeah.
something for
It's
him.
like a presumptive sales tactic, right?
Exactly. It was from one entrepreneur to another. It was just great to see someone kind of like sewing all these little things in to build up their position in the this arrangement we're making here. I'm like, I got to have you on to talk about see how much of that was like intended and not intended. Like,
Yeah.
did you just accidentally write the greatest sales email of your life?
So, hey, look, there's skill to that. And it sounds to me like the guy is intent on making it part of his career. And, I try to get as much exposure as you can. So shows like yours and others mean more to folks like us that are in the small publication or indie publication world because it's exposure that you're not paying for. The only payment is technically the time value of money, right? It's like us spending an hour together, doing this, and am I going to get value out of that? Or are you going to get value out of that? And the answer is obviously mutually yes, or we wouldn't be doing it. But but ultimately, that helps the little guy because I'm not going to have the end stock at Barnes and Noble anywhere. You're going to have to order me when you go into that store. But ultimately, that's the goal, right? You get more exposure, and I've had stuff fallen flat. I've had stuff that's gone viral. It's just a matter of just keeping at it. And I don't think there's a rhyme or reason to it. I know people make a lot of money selling that. And I think there are some concepts you can repeat over and over again. But for the most part, I had a cinematographer do a couple of book trailers for me. And they were great. And the book trailers were what I would say successfully viewed. And then he did the making of. And by not by accident, on purpose. He did hashtag Hogwarts, hashtag Harry Potter, and it had over 275,000 views on Instagram. And the making of was more viewed than the damn trailers themselves. And and that just shows you that somehow it's just every now and then just stuff happens, right? So like it's all good. It's just a matter of just keeping at it, and that'll help sell books.
Well, and that's the thing I keep hearing from everybody that I've had on the show is like the real important thing is if you want to do it, keep doing it, keep trying because the only way you're a failure is when you give up and you don't achieve what you want to. Until that point, it's all game.
Yep.
If you can find a way to keep the ball rolling, you're doing fine. Another thing that you mentioned that I always bring up is relationships. You talk about like doing the small little podcasts and things like that to build the audience. And to me, like it seems like the relationships that you build are probably the most important part of, the marketing and the sales of for small authors. And I think that's why, like, as you were talking, your first book does a little, second book maybe has a little success. It's not to that fourth book that you really achieve what you want to achieve. And it feels like so much of that is because, unless you're someone like George who really built the audience he built over the years by not finishing it, you're building trust with each one of those books with the people that you're trying to bring in. And you're making a promise. And when you keep that promise, like that's bam, that by that fourth, I'm like, oh, like I personally, I don't like to start something that's not finished because of George R. R. Martin. I remember when I was waiting for, God, I think 2 years for that last Dark Tower book by King.
Yeah.
And I was like getting really, really hairy at the end because he had that accident with the car. And you're like, oh my God, is he not going to finish this? I've invested so much time in this and I'm not going to get an ending. And, so much of that for an author is just building those relationships and trust with the audience.
Yeah, well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. In our business, it's important because a lot of people believe the same thing you believe, is they don't want to start something that won't be finished. And Martin, for what it's worth, I hear that a lot because of the kind of books I write. He's the pinnacle example of, are you going to finish? And so for me, it's one of the reasons that I'm doing as much as I can to get this out, so I could say, here's Warminster Saga, 4 books, it's done. I'm going to do other stuff too, and we're going to have origin stories of your favorite characters. Then I'm going to get on to another Warminster Saga, and you're going to be able to see, and I'm launching something on Vela, which is a, sort
And
of,
everyone loves that.
yeah, and they'll see momentum, right?
The key is you got to have that self-contained story finished. Like you can't break out and start building the world outside of that core story until you finish the core story. And like, because it's, I know from lots of people, like it's just you feel taken advantage of. It's like, come on, dude, you promised us, and like now we're never gonna get. And don't get me wrong, he's an old dude, and I understand. Like he's running after the opportunities that are ahead of him while they're ahead of him, because that stuff doesn't last forever, and we all know that. But like, it does create this awkward tension between the creator and the people that frankly have supported them for so long.
Yep. I'm the same way. Like I feel like you got to the point where you watch the HBO show and that's not the real ending, because they couldn't wait
Yeah,
for him anymore. And, you're right. I mean, bilking might be the right term. I think I get where he's going. I have a similar
yeah.
thing where, you want it to be written in a way that it's perfect and you're very comfortable with the ending you've created. And I have a tendency to write my books backwards to forward. So I start at the end and then I go back to
Hmm.
the beginning and then fill in the middle just to make sure that everything is in there. And he's a lot more meticulous than that. And I consider myself a plotter. Like I have to
Yeah.
plan everything. And then there are guys out there like Stephen King who can just sit down and start writing and they don't know where they're going. And that's why sometimes their endings kind of veer off and they don't make as much sense as someone who plans. But they can knock out a book in 2 months, and you're like, where the hell did that
Hmm.
come from? I just read his new one on Christmas, and it's already Easter, and I got another one to read. Like for me, it's like I've had to plan everything, and I can see where he's going, and he's got this generation's Tolkien in his hands, the
Hmm.
adult version of that, and doesn't want to blow it. But it's been forever. It's like just put a stake in it. Like it's okay to say it's done, but like get it done.
Honestly, his biggest issue is he was famous in the age of Twitter, where everyone gets to watch him go to his beloved Eagles games and be like, dude, put the football down and go fucking right.
Yeah, yeah.
Please, please, just get to doing what you're supposed to do. All the football games you want when the books are written.
Yeah, but get this done first. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, God damn, this has gone so fast. A little bit, if you could, about the your magazine while we still have you.
Yeah, sure. So, Altered Reality magazine was started by someone other than me. And she eventually turned it over to me when she was getting out of the business. And originally, Altered Reality was supposed to be a magazine set up for the love of the art, and it was to develop, speculative fiction writers, speculative poetry writers, with a focus on sci-fi and fantasy. Since I've taken over, I've turned the business up a little bit. I guess that's just my natural entrepreneurial flair. I've gone out and found sponsors for it, starting to get paid for. I'd like to eventually start to pay the authors that I'm publishing there, the artists that I'm doing there, the poets that are on the site. But I've also expanded it to go a little bit more into that speculative realm, where I want to see things from horror writers and gothic writers and those that write about monsters and cryptids and have a fun time with it, and dystopian stuff, which might not have been the direction the previous ownership wanted to go, but it's something that we're not afraid of tackling. And so we've opened that up. And, as someone who's been published and always wanted to be an indie author themselves, but went in a different direction, this, I think, is that portal to publication. This is an opportunity. If your work is up to snuff, go ahead and submit it, and we might publish you. Now, you're not going to make any money on that, but that'll get you some exposure. And we do some great cross marketing and things like that with folks. We create reels, we do social media around it. We announce authors of the month. We'll eventually have paid for one contests where folks can vote on things, and we're growing the brand this year as part of that. We've got some really cool things that are going to be coming up as the year progresses, but kind of one step at a time. But that said, I've got about 100 individual authors and artists that are on the site already, and I've got people knocking at my door for it. We get about 160,000 views. It's a nice publication that I think will help many folks if they're trying to get some exposure for that, and or they just got a great product and just want to get it out there. That's the one thing I find, that some authors don't want to make money. They're just artists,
I
right?
want people to see it.
Yeah, and I just want to put it out there, and I hope you like it, and it's just, and this is my art. This is coming from me, and here you go. And if I make $50 on it, great. If I make nothing on it, great. It doesn't matter to them. And this is just a way to show it to a bunch of other eyes. And then perhaps with that success, that'll beget additional success for them. Whether it's commercially, who cares? I think it's from their art form, it'll encourage them to do more. And and like you said before, networking everybody together. When you get 100 creatives working on the same site that want to see the success, not just of the site, but also, of their own work and others. And that's the one thing that I find so different than the field I'm leaving.
Well, that's so classic. I mean, look at Lovecraft. Look at his contemporaries. What made those guys get as good as they were when they're all fighting to be on the guy on the page of Strange Tales?
Right.
Who can write the story that's going to be the one that gets featured?
Yep.
Is it going to? Yeah, that's the stuff that gives you the axe to grind, I guess.
Yeah, and it gives you the motivation to make sure that your product is the best it can be. And we like to be able to feature people that might not have gotten that chance. I mean, I think the problem for indie authors is going to be the portal through which they're selling this, right? You look at just Amazon, for example. What is it, 80,000 new pieces of work a month or whatever? It's some ridiculous amount.
7,500 a day is what I was told.
It is a literal sea of stuff. How do you differentiate your state? You're going to come across something by accident. You've got to do something more to bump you up. So the more exposure you can get, I think it's better for you and your product. And for us, we're trying to help those that are giving us solid product, and we're then able to take that and help them publish it and cross promote them. They can promote the magazine. We help promote their work in the hopes that it's mutually beneficial.
Awesome, man. And especially in like the field I'm in, which is trying to market books. It's good to know.
Yeah. Look at us as a resource. We'll be right here.
No, absolutely. I'm going to be. Look, you're trying to release this science fiction book. You got to go here. You got to go. Hand in something. We got to be promoting this. You have to have something to put on your email list. Here's a great avenue to make something happen in that regard.
It's content, man. It's content.
It is. So, if you'd like, I'd like to get some URLs we can send people to check out your work, and all the things you're involved in.
Yeah, sure. Mine are pretty straightforward. I mean, www.jvhilliard with HILLIARD.com takes you to my website. And then all of my other socials are a variant of that. So if you're on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Twitter, you could find me at JV Hilliard Books. Or if you're on Facebook or Discord, you can just look for JV Hilliard and I'll pop up. So you can find me there. My books are relatively found ubiquitously. I would say that you can find them on things like Amazon. You can go to Dragon Moon Press. You can download from Audible and about 20 different other distribution channels if you like ebooks or audiobooks, and prefer them over paperbacks or vice versa. You could find it anywhere, and on occasion you'll find it in a store somewhere. It just depends on how aggressive the store owners or the chains are. So
Here's the real question.
Mhm.
You say Audible. Who reads your books?
In terms of the kind of person that reads my books,
No, I'm talking about if you're on Audible, that means you have audiobooks.
Mhm.
Are you reading your books or do you have someone else read your
Oh
books?
my goodness. No. I got lucky. I found there's a gentleman named Victor Bavine that is the voice for Drizzt and all the Dark Elf trilogies for Salvatore.
Okay.
And I got referred to him by Salvatore by accident. Salvatore just did a tweet one day and I was on the tweet and I was looking for that. And so I reached out to Victor, and Victor's voice is so well known in the genre. He, just by the nature of his voice being on the recording, he sells books for me.
Oh,
People
I'm sure.
like to listen to his voice. And so, I went down that path, even though it was a little bit out of, it wasn't covered by my publisher, right? It was something I was out there kind of on my own saying, you know what, there's a little risk reward here. I'm going to go and throw at it just because I know it'll pay itself off. And Victor has been great to work with. So and there's another gentleman named Aaron Smith who has done the Runer series by Abigail Linhart. I've used him for my book trailers, and he'll be featured as well as Victor being featured in the video game. These guys have great voice. Aaron's voice is a little bit more voice of God with the British accent kind of thing. Victor's is very storytelling, theatrical. It's a little different. Like, you're going to get a stage actor from Victor. You're going to get, kind of like the James Earl Jones, Jean-Luc Picard kind of voice from Aaron. And it's a nice little blend and mix there.
Well, you got somebody with a pedigree, which fights my natural inclination. Where I just love authors reading books.
Yeah.
For me, I that feeling of the intention being there, I really love.
Yeah.
Even if it's dorky old Stephen King's voice, him reading it still makes it feel better to me.
I have nothing against it, and I'm not going to say that I won't do it one day. My greatest fear was screwing it up. Is my voice good enough? Will people turn it off because I have a strange voice, or I didn't know anything about creating and promoting an audiobook. And so I didn't mind paying for the service and found it to be worth the time in gold.
Well, see, that's curious to me. And I personally think it's a failure of the industry. I almost feel like you should be spending more time doing the audiobooks than the actual books at this point, just because of how books are consumed. Like, the majority of people nowadays are listening. I mean, my Goodreads goal is 104 books this year, and I'm gonna tell you maybe 3 of those might actually be read. Almost all of them are gonna be audiobooks that I'm listening to while I'm out driving or doing other stuff. So I know I'm not alone in that's how I consume things, just because you can tell from the popularity of podcasts that people are they're taking their media that way as opposed to reading. Now, by all means, the book should always be there. But I keep hearing about like publishing companies that they almost as an afterthought think about putting out the audiobook. Maybe do you think that's because of the added expense, or is it something else? Just because it does seem like you would amplify exponentially how much you have the ability to be listened to.
Well, I'm a big believer in availability, right? So some people, like you said, like to read the old-fashioned paperback or hardback in front of the fire while they're sipping a glass of wine. Others, like you and I, don't have time for that, right? We've got day jobs, we've got families, we've got, and people that are like me, I travel a lot. So, listening to audiobooks, even though it may sometimes feel like a cheat, isn't a cheat. You're still doing it. It's part of the fabric of the industry, and it is the fastest growing part of it. You just hit the nail on the head. So why would you not get on that train? You got to be on that train in some instances because it's going to be driving it. And if it's not available there, I might not read it. Like, for example, I mean, I just got done listening to Margaret Weiss's and Tracy Hickman's Dragons of Deceit.
Mm-hmm.
I physically got a hardback copy of that for Christmas, and I listened to it because of so much traveling I do this time of year,
I've got the bookshelves behind me. I do buy books.
Yeah.
But I know that I'm going to get to that audiobook a long time. I have a friend who just released a book that I haven't even gotten a chance to go through because I don't have time to go through the hard copy here, boss. Let me know when it's out an audiobook. I'll give it a listen.
Yeah, and I just think it's an amazing tool. And if that's a way that people engage with your material, you got to have it available to them. And yes, it is an extra expense. And yes, different platforms take different chunks out of you for doing that. But I'm telling you, even if it's break even, it's good to say that you got it, because people will these days, it went from before kind of being only for the fortunate to now something that is industry standard. And eventually, if you don't have it, it's going to look weird, right? It's like, where's the audio version of this? I don't get it. And we're just not there yet. We're in that middle phase, I think, which is like, hey, everybody's got one, so figure out how to make it happen. And there are other services out there. Like I've worked and referred a number of indie authors to Twin Tails Publishing. There's a guy named Todd Waits, and Todd does these at a more reasonable indie rate, and has a stable of like 30 or 40 different voices, male and female, varying accents, different kind of genre specific, or folks that are just, good narrators. And he does it himself too. And, I think he did like 60 books last year. I mean, literally it's just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And those things compound. And eventually people are going to listen to that. And even though those checks might be small in the beginning, eventually they're going to continue to grow as more people download that and depend on that and want that, as you said, as the fastest growing part of the industry.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for coming on, JV. I'm glad we had this conversation. I'm going to be honest, I imagine and hope that we'll be able to talk again sometime.
I'd love to.
Because you are definitely a wealth of information that, even your story, like you didn't plan on going out there and becoming, getting in like any kind of publisher. You'd intended on doing the DIY every way everyone else does. And just so the option, even if you don't intend to do it that way, is there for people.
Yeah, it has been my utter pleasure to come on the show. I would love to come back, and I appreciate the invitation. Maybe we can do it after book 3 or 4 released later in the year. But I'm also available if you've got folks that want to talk to me about my experience. They could obviously reach out to me through my website. They can hit me up and direct message me on any form of my social media accounts. I'd be more than happy to chat with them. And if it requires a Zoom or a call, I'd be more than happy to do that as well. I mean, I would not be where I am if people didn't help me, and I want to be able to pay that forward. So, no matter how small your project is or how crazy where you're stuck might be, I'm more than happy to try to assist. And if I can't, hopefully through the network I've been able to build, I can send you to someone who can.
And you hear him, folks, as I always say, it's always about the relationships you build. That's what's going to make or break anybody in the business. So, right on. Well, thanks a lot, boss.
Thank you, sir.
Do you fancy yourself the next Tolkien, Lewis, or Barker? Maybe you just have something subversive to say. Hopefully this podcast is helping you. But maybe your ambitions are just a little bigger than you can handle on your own. Head over to ironeadsmarketing.com and let Nikki P help ensure your book doesn't release to nobody.